Hello, I'm Doug King and I'm with Presence. Presence is a teaching ministry that focuses primarily on the narrative that we would call the biblical narrative. There are many different narratives, of course, in the realm of spirituality and world religions, but our focus and the source of our evolution, if you will, comes from the biblical narrative itself. And one of the things that we're very excited about with regard to interspirituality is, for us, this represents the next evolutionary step for our planet, and a step that really moves, as Kurt Johnson says in his book, The Coming Interspiritual Age, toward the globalization of concepts that's happening right now. If we look from purely a biblical narrative standpoint, and we ask ourselves, well, are we saying that spirituality is just now appearing on the planet? The obvious answer is no. No more than we would say that love is just now appearing on the planet. What we would say is that the narrative would begin with the metaphorical story of Adam, which is all humanity having their eyes opened to that which is spiritual, that which is beyond the self. And so we find in the narrative that there's not only Adam, but there's also this concept of God. And so the human being becomes unique in that regard, in that there is now not just me as the human being, but there's also God. And that means that spirituality has suddenly appeared on the planet Earth. And if I look at the evolution of spirituality from that point forward, in that same genesis of humanity, if you will, is the story of Father Abraham. And from Father Abraham, we then introduce the concept of the tribal. And this is the next evolutionary step in the understanding of spirituality, of love, and of relationship. And so at that time, tribal Abraham introduces those concepts on more of a genealogical basis. So the first concepts of love are pretty well confined to the tribe, or the concepts of relationship would be confined to the tribe. But as evolution grows and we find that cultures come in contact with each other, so also do we see in humanity feudal systems that come into play, and then eventually empires. And in the empire state, we enter into what would be called the traditional phase. Some people may call this the pre-modern age, if you will. And in that traditional age, we have the development of hierarchies, and that is our understanding as humans of the way that love works, the way that spirituality works. Again, it's not as though love does not exist in the pre-modern age, or that love does not exist in the empire, because it does. If we were to read David in the Psalms, or we were to read the Hebrew prophets, we would see a lot of material is written about love. Yet that traditional age was only a step in the understanding of love. And this is one of the things at Presence that we believe is an extremely important point, and that is that there should be no fear in the pursuit of higher understandings, or what we would call growth. In other words, we don't think or understand in our way of seeing that the point of spirituality is to grasp a terminal place or a terminal meaning. Rather, the point of spirituality is infinite growth. So when we get to this place where we have the traditional age, that is an aspect where love is seen to be in my specific understanding. The traditional age is one that sometimes is called fundamentalism. Why? Because within the traditional age, there is an attempt to say that the truth and that the spirit and that love is defined and confined by a particular form. That form might be a particular religion. So, for example, in my own personal history, I come from Christianity. That was the beginning of my journey. And in that, and in my earlier days of it, I believed that I was part of the one true church. And that was a belief that I had, and I loved people, and I believed in spirit. And I was very much thinking that this was in line with the totality of everything love and spirit could be. But as I evolved, and I consider this evolution, those who remain in a more fundamental mindset disagree with me on this, and that is their consciousness and their own spiritual journey. But my spiritual journey was one that I began to move beyond those kinds of concepts. So, for example, in history, if we look at that traditional age, we move from it to a modern age, to modernity. What happened in modernity? In modernity, we have the Enlightenment. In modernity, we have the Renaissance. And one of the things that happens in modernity is that for the first time, people begin to question. In the traditional age, they do not question. You are a loyal subject of the empire, and questioning was an absolute no-no. And so when we move into modernity, the first people that begin to question were the people within science, and they begin to say, you know, that story about how God created everything in 6 days, we have questions about that. And you know how the church is saying that it is a church belief that the sun revolves around the earth? Well, we're questioning that. We believe actually that the earth might revolve around the sun, and the church said, from that traditional viewpoint, we consider that to be a heresy, which another way of saying that, if I were to paint a box, which I would call a form, another way to say that is outside of the form. Then if I move into postmodernity, what happens is that we realize that modernity doesn't have an answer or a solution to the innermost spiritual yearnings of our soul, and so we then go to the other inverse position of understanding, which is to say that in postmodernity, all forms are to be honored. This is what Ken Wilber would call flatlanding or relativizing, where all forms are to be honored. And once again, we will find love in every single one of those forms. We will find spirituality in every single one of those forms. But for us, the exciting thing, and our understanding and our definition of interspirituality, is the movement beyond all those forms, which would be trans-traditional, which take advantage of all the teachings of Jesus and of Moses and of the Buddha and of the Upanishads and all the people that have teachings that have to do with the nature of the formless, which is to say the spirit, which has no boundaries and which has no forms. So as presence, we're very excited to be part of this new interspiritual dialogue, and we certainly welcome any and everyone who would care to join us in this as we collectively pull together as one united global family.